The oboist's A faded and the hall hushed. I was halfway to my seat when the MC read the title I had coined at 3 a.m. Except it wasn't under my name. The first 3 notes landed, and the auditorium applauded a theft in C minor. The program said new voices, faculty selections, but the headline soloist was the Conservatory's golden boy, a 20-year-old from Brno, with sponsor shoes and a bow that cost more than my rent. I had been invited as one of 5 community partners, the kind phrase institutions use when the tuition is 0 and the hours are not. In row G, seat 19, I tried to swallow around a mouth that had turned papery. When the violas entered on the offbeat, my hands knew exactly where the 4th horn would fluff, because I wrote the slur that made it inevitable. He must have felt me stand. The mentor. He sat across the aisle, 2 rows ahead, hair smoothed into a public posture. In the dim, he turned his head just an inch, a cat hearing the door. Later, I would remember that tiny pivot more than the applause. The thief of the story is not a cartoon villain. He is what arts institutions breed on purpose. Brilliant enough to disarm you, kind enough to make you thank him for the bruise, fluent in the polite grammar of theft. When I met him, he was the new head of composition and contemporary practice at the Prague National Conservatory of Music, Dr. Otto Bergmann, German mother, Austrian father, a degree from the Hochschule in Berlin, and a CV with commissions that were both real and aspirational. He'd moved to Prague the summer I arrived from Vermont, and he shook hands like he wanted the friendship to be mutual. I landed in Prague in late August 2023 with 2 suitcases, a second-hand Yamaha keyboard, and the email subject every visa holder dreads: "Welcome, please see attachment." The attachment was a PDF from the immigration department listing 8 items: passport copy, proof of accommodation, health insurance, bank statement with a minimum balance of CZK 91,110, about 4,000 talents, criminal record extract, 2 passport photos, proof of acceptance, and a structured creative plan. The plan was the only thing I didn't resent. I wrote it like a prayer. 6 months to compose a string orchestra work, integrating field recordings from tram routes 2 and 22, animating urban tempo into notated polyrhythm. The conservatory called it the Prague Urban Fellowship and paid me 18,000 CZK a month, about 780, for community engagement and workshop leadership, which meant I taught free Saturday classes in harmony to teenagers who played Chopin with a ferocity people reserve for telling the truth. My rent on a 4th-floor 1-room at Opatovica 14 was 15,500 CZK. I did math in my head a lot that autumn, then stopped because it felt like rehearsing defeat. He came to my first workshop on 7th of September, sat in the back, asked a question about metric modulations that felt more like an invitation to be seen than an exam. Later, he complimented the score paper I used. "Hand-ruled, I respect the archaic," he said, smiling, then put both hands in his pockets, as if containing the next compliment for later. He told me he liked my tram idea, that the city needed artists who listened beneath the pictures. He offered to meet weekly for informal mentorship, and my ribcage opened the way it does when luck and a door align. Red flags do not come red. They come as ribbon, tucked around a gift. He never took copies of my sketches. He said he preferred to hear them in your voice, but he would say, "Just leave it on the piano," and later I'd find my pages restacked with the kind of alignment that suggested they had been elsewhere. He had me email him structural summaries rather than PDFs, because attachment security, after a hack at his German publisher. He forbade recordings of our sessions. I want us free to be wrong. He would stop by my Saturday workshops to warm up the room, and the students loved his way of turning a question into a joke into a challenge. He held up my early motif on the board, like a wine you decant for friends, and kept saying the thing every ravenous beginner wants to hear. "You're not derivative." His calendar was a geography of applause. In October, he was in Vienna 2 days a week, consulting for a festival. In November, he taught a guest class in Munich, then flew to Helsinki, then returned with a scarf people pretended to not notice. He took me to coffee when he was in town, and paid with a card embossed not with his name, but with Barbaricum Projects, which I assumed was a management company until later, when I found the business registry entry listing him as director and sole beneficiary. The piece I was writing had a working title that embarrassed me until it didn't: A City That Counts in Fives. It was a 14-minute suite in 4 movements: platform, passing, crossing, return. The opening was a 5.5.4 ostinato in cellos and bass, 5-car trams in a city that keeps changing how old it is. I registered my drafts on 18th of October 2023 with the US Copyright Office through ECO as an unpublished work, Form PA 45 fee, registration number PAU4 186093, because a composer friend in Austin named Gabe had once said, "If you can afford bread, you can afford paper shields." He had a way with metaphors that made me braver than my bank account. I also sent lead sheets to OSA, the Czech Collecting Society, under their online portal's work notification form, because my fellowship coordinator said it was good practice, and I liked practice that came with numbers. I entered. Title, A City That Counts in Fives. Writer, me. Publisher, none. Duration, 1408. Control, 100. I got back a work ID, OSA 7263145. The email felt like a fence someone else put up for once. On 12th of December 2023, in his office lined with framed programs, Otto proposed something that felt like sunlight. "Let's aim to premiere your work in March," he said, toe-tapping the leg of his desk like a conductor out of habit. "There's a new Voices program on 15th of March, Dvořák Hall at Rudolfinum. We could put your piece there alongside two of the student winners. The orchestra needs something urban that isn't kitsch." For a second I thought I had imagined the sentence. It was like hearing your name from another room in your favorite register. He said he would shepherd it through the programming committee, that we would need to give them clean materials by mid-January, nothing to scare the librarians. He said we, and I said thank you, and he looked at me with a softness that made me forget how precise his compliments usually were. I spent Christmas alone with a radiator and my score. I cut a bar that had been self-indulgent since October, and finally admitted it. I added a contrabassoon the way you add a confession, knowing it changes how people hear you. On 3rd of January 2024, I dropped off a clean-bound score, printed at Copy General on Lazarska, 360 CZK, and a full set of parts in the Conservatory library for the orchestra manager, a woman named Carolina, who runs rehearsal schedules like a traffic controller, holds a grid. I emailed a structural summary to Otto. 4 bullet points, total duration, tempi, doubling. He replied with a heart, then a sentence I reread like a diagnosis. "You've built a machine with a soul." Mid-January became late. January became a tiny hiccup, Otto said on 26th of January. The programming committee thought the piece might be a little long for the slot he could get. 10 to 12 minutes would be ideal. I negotiated with myself and carved it to 12:20 by tightening the crossing section and folding return into a reorchestrated platform. I brought new parts on 28th of January and watched as Carolina placed them into a drawer labeled New Voices March. I asked, lightly, I hoped, for an email confirming programming. She clicked through her Outlook with a speed that should be measured and found the internal memo. New Voices, faculty selections, student works by R.H., plus Urban Suite, curated by Dr. Bergman. The word curated made me go cold. "Is there a composer listed for the suite?" I asked. "It says Bergman Project," she said, and smiled absent-mindedly at her monitor. I went for a walk and counted my steps until I started hating numbers. I asked Otto, calmly, in his office, flanked by the framed posters of premieres he'd guided, and some he had only breathed near. He did that thing where men with patience for themselves rearrange their face to perform concern. "Oh, semantics," he said. "They use Bergman Project as a label. It won't be on the program like that." He told me not to be American about ownership, which I laughed at, because I'm American about what's mine. He asked me to trust him. He said the words lovely people put on postcards: process, partnership, community. On 4 February, I got an email from Press PNC LCZ saying they needed composer bios and photos for the New Voices program. They attached a Word template where my name did not appear. The 3 bios slotted Student R, Student H, and Curatorial Suite by faculty. I replied attaching my bio and a photo because I had learned in Prague that sometimes you slip your existence into a gap and see if anyone notices. Press replied with, "Thanks," and nothing else. The next day I went to the library and asked Carolina if I could check my parts. She handed me the folder, and the cover now said Bergman, Urban Suite, 12 An, in a beautiful font I would later learn was purchased under Barbaricum Project's Adobe license. My handwriting was still on the inside of the flute part. Fel 1 changed to pick COM. 83, circled in the way I circle instructions for people who are asked to change more than they are paid. I took photos of the cover. I took photos of my markings. I took photos of the part that had my pencil on it since 11th November. VLN2, Divisi at M149, keep quiet. I emailed the photos to myself with the subject, insurance. The next right move was the hardest thing I did all year. I asked for paperwork. On 6th of February, I requested, formally and in writing, a commissioning agreement, or, at minimum, a programming confirmation, naming the composer of the work Urban Suite, slated for 15th of March. I also asked that all materials credit my authorship in library records and programs. I copied the dean, a woman named Dr. Clara Vasella, who had a pianist's patience and an administrator's smile. Otto replied with an airy paragraph about unnecessary formalism and how this isn't a commission, this is a platform, and Dr. Vasella politely scheduled a meeting for 12th of February at 9:30 in her glass-walled office. When we met, Otto folded his long legs and said he had been protecting me from institutional mess by simplifying language. She asked him, sweetly, if that meant erasing me. He laughed. She didn't. He promised to send an amended program listing me as composer. On 14th of February, a Wednesday, I got a PDF of the printed program proof. My piece, new title, City in 5, composer, Bergman. My stomach made a small bark of air. I forwarded it to Dr. Vesela and attached my OSA work ID, my US copyright registration, and a scan of my original title page with my signature and date, 3rd of January 2024. She wrote back that she had asked press to hold the print run and that she would get clarity from Otto by end of day. Clarity arrived as a phone call from his office, not to apologize, but to warn. "You're making enemies," he said. "You're being aggressive." He called me talented in the past tense and said composers survive institutions by understanding which battles are cosmetic. I did not raise my voice. I said, "Names are not cosmetics." He said, "We'll revisit this after March." I said, "We'll revisit it now." What happened next is exactly how people lose things in public without anyone noticing. On 20th February, press sent a revised program proof listing, Urban Suite, as curated by Bergman, with contributions by emerging artists. My name still wasn't there. I wrote again. On 22nd February, I received a calendar invite from the Conservatory's legal counsel, a man named Jan, who used kind regards, like it could soften a throat. He offered to facilitate a mutual understanding. In the meeting, he agreed that my authorship was clear, then built a paragraph slowly, brick by brick, until the room contained something else. We propose, for this performance, to credit the work to the programming body, with liner notes acknowledging the creative input of contributors. We can draft a separate agreement for subsequent performances. The phrase, "for this performance," is a weapon that looks like a compromise. I said no. I said my name or not at all. On 28th February, my Saturday teenagers arrived buzzing about the posters downtown for new voices. "Your piece," they said. One kid, Zuzana, had photographed a poster at Malostranska. Urban Suite, Bergman, R.R.H. I stood in the stairwell after class and listened to the hum of a building where my future was a distraint. My American friend Gabe, the metaphor one, lives in Austin and writes contracts nobody reads but everybody lives by. On 1st March, I forwarded him every email and asked if he had a colleague in Prague who could do an hour consult. He wrote back with two things. 1. A PDF of a standard attribution clause used by ensembles contracting living composers, and 2. An introduction to an IP attorney in Brno named Mamsignor. Petra Novotna, who responded on 4th of March with subject Kava a Pravo, Coffee and Law. We met on 6th of March at EMA Espresso Bar on Na Florenzi, and she listened in the way people do when they've learned that silence is leverage. She asked for 3 items, my first dated score file, any registrations, and evidence that the library held my parts. I showed her all 3, and she smiled the way surgeons smile when the tumor is circled with a marker. We can cut. She proposed a 3-step sequence. Step 1, a formal cease and desist to the Conservatory, and Otto personally, citing Czech authors' rights, autorskie pravo, under Act Number 21 12,000 Kolonien Sen, Section 11, Moral Rights, and Section 12, Economic Rights, attaching my OSA work ID and US registration, and demanding correction of program credits. Step 2, if they refused, a request for an injunction in municipal court to prevent the performance of the work under any name but mine. Step 3, if they pushed ahead, litigation for damages and a public corrective notice. I asked how fast we could do Step 1. She said, by breakfast. On 7th of March at 8:12 a.m., she sent the demand, 9 precise paragraphs and 3 exhibits. She gave them until 11th March at 16 Konso to reply and correct all public materials. At 13:20, press emailed, "We will revise digital materials, but the print run is complete." At 14:05, the dean wrote, "We are taking this seriously," and scheduled an emergency meeting for 10 March. Otto called at 14:11. I didn't pick up. The meeting was theatre with better coffee. The dean opened by saying my authorship should be credited. Press said the deadline had passed, and paper had already become ink. Otto said, "I was trying to protect the cohesion of the program," then turned to me and said, "I asked you to trust me." I said, "I asked you to name me." Petra, who had come along and sat in a corner knitting until it was time to stop, put down her needles and slid a one-page compromise across the table. A sticker to be affixed to every printed program at the door, naming me as the composer, and a pre-show announcement correcting the credit before any notes were played. She had also drafted a post-performance press note with an apology from the institution. The dean nodded. Press nodded slowly. Otto stared at the sticker like it had insulted his childhood. On 11 March at 15:56, 4 minutes before the deadline, we got a reply from Jan, legal. They would do the sticker and the announcement. For this performance. Petra wrote back, "We will be listening." Then she added a paragraph that made me fall in love with law. Please note that any performance in which the work is credited to any entity or person other than the author will be considered a fresh infringement. The week felt like a clothesline in winter. Everything took longer to dry, and you watched it in case the wind could sue you. On 15th March, I got dressed in the nicest version of what I am, grey trousers and a white shirt with a collar too polite for my neck, and I walked across the bridge to Rudolfinum. I thought about throwing up and didn't. I picked up my ticket at will call and asked the teenage usher about the stickers. She held up a stack of programs with little white rectangles ready to peel. My name was on them. She added apologetically, "We were told to only put them on if someone asks." That sentence is how institutions protect reputations and harm people. I went inside. The oboist tuned. The MC walked out and began the program with the 2 student pieces, called them Fresh and Brave, and then smiled wide and said, "And now our curated urban suite by our own Dr. Bergman, featuring contributions from our emerging community partner." He had not been told to say that, or he had been and made it worse. I heard the first 3 notes and stood. In row E, Otto did the cat turn. I watched him smile at the audience the way you smile when you have been announced and want the love to match your posture. I walked out, then back in, then down an aisle the ushers reserve for emergencies. A woman in a black dress touched my arm. I nodded at her, like I would nod at a stranger holding my bag on a bus. I walked to the lip of the stage and said to the MC, softly but into his microphone, "There is a correction. This work is mine." He said, "Excuse me." Not in the theatrical way of courtiers, but the real way of men whose scripts have been cut. I repeated the sentence, slower. The audience made that sound audiences make when they are about to decide what kind of people they are. The MC looked to the wings. The dean was standing there, white-faced, and she nod-smiled the way a person nod-smiles when she sees an ambulance coming and it is hers. "Yes," she said into the backstage mic. "We need to correct the credits. The composer is our urban fellow, not Dr. Bergman. Applause for the composer." It was not a crescendo of justice. It was a murmur of relief, but it was air. Otto stood. He took 2 steps toward the stage and then stopped because the orchestra manager, who knows where every person should be, put out a hand the way you put out a hand to a dog you love who is about to run into a road. He stepped back and smiled again, and someone clapped in the way people clap when they want to move on. I sat down. I listened to my own piece taken seriously by humans. The violas still fluffed. The contrabassoon made the sound of a harbour remembering storms. In measure 94, the second clarinet did the microdynamic I had asked for, and no one had believed would land, and I pressed my fingers into the armrest hard enough to leave the shapes of small coins. After, there was no reception, or if there was, nobody told me. But there were emails. The dean sent a formal apology at 1944, which threaded through my inbox into Petra's like a train entering a station. Press updated the website credits. The Conservatory posted a statement at 21:03. "We regret a misattribution in tonight's program and celebrate the composer who made our city sing." It is the sort of sentence institutions keep in a drawer. He texted me at 22:11 with 4 words, "We need to talk." At 22:12 he sent, "Not like this." At 22:17, "You have embarrassed me." At 22:24, "This is not how careers are built." I did not reply. I put my phone on my radiator and watched a moth do something brave and stupid around the lamp. The days after were procedure. Petra filed a formal complaint with OSA on 18th of March to update records and note the attempted misattribution, because collecting societies are bureaucracies that care, eventually, about paper. She recommended we send a registered letter to Barbaricum Projects, Otto's company, requesting that they cease using Urban Suite or any derivative in any portfolio or EPK, electronic press kit, and we did on 20th of March, citing Czech unfair competition law. She also suggested we register with PRS in the UK as a reciprocal member because the New Voices programme had been live-streamed and archived on a server in London. If there's money, she said, we collect it twice, and then gently explained reciprocal rights, like she was teaching a child to put marbles into the right jar. The Conservatory offered me a small honorarium of 12,000 CZK for the distress suffered, which I declined and then accepted after Petra rolled her eyes and said, "Take the money. It admits a debt." On 25th of March, the Dean met me for coffee and said the quiet thing out loud. He has done versions of this before, but never with a composer who had her paperwork and a lawyer. She didn't ask me not to tell anyone. She asked me to stay and teach another term. I said I would think about it. I thought about it. I said yes. The escalation came not as theatrics, but as boring persistence turning sharp. Otto started appearing where schedules repeat. On 2nd of April, he stood across from the library stacks, flipping a magazine he wasn't reading. On 5th of April, he was at the tram stop at Narodní třída at 8 Hakau, the time I catch the 22 to the Conservatory. I stood on the opposite end of the platform and looked at the reflection of us in the glass. Two people who looked like a painting of a choice. He didn't speak. I took a photo of the reflection and sent it to Petra with the subject documenting. She told me to file a stalking report with the police if he spoke or followed. Do it even if you think it's nothing, she said. Paper is your friend now. On 9th of April, after he stepped toward me at the coffee stand and said, I can still fix this, I filed. The officer at Bartolomiejski wrote, Podezření z nebezpečného pronásledování, 354 zákoniku, the Czech legal code for stalking, and took my printed log. He gave me a case number, KRPA 1768411CJ 2024 00KR. The desk smelled like carpet and a kind of old coffee that is not a drink but a mood. He started emailing people. A cellist I admire forwarded me a message in which Otto called me unstable and out to destroy the program. A composer in Munich sent me a story of how Otto had shaped her early works into something program-friendly, and how grateful she had been until she saw a grant application that described her orchestration as our faculty template. The emails came to me in the way bad weather moves across maps, visible and slow. Then something else happened, a tilt of the light I had not expected. On 17th of April, I got a message from the Conservatory librarian, Carolina, who isn't prone to drama because she spends her days bathing in it. She had catalogued my original parts under Bergman Urban Suite because of the cover, and now that we had corrected the credits, she wanted to recatalogue the set under my name and mark the original cover as erroneous label. She asked me to come by and initial the correction in the margin. I went and signed my name next to erroneous. The word felt better than applause. The new ally appeared the way allies do, gradually and then all at once. His name is Lorenzo Vitale, an Italian-Polish audio engineer who freelances as a recording director for the Conservatory streams and teaches a class in acoustics on Thursdays. He is 32, lives in Žižkov, keeps a bowl of lemons on his windowsill like a set designer, and wears headphones in a way that looks like a person who hears Powerline singing. He sent me a link on 20th April, the archive of the 15 March stream, timestamped at the exact moment the emcee miscredited my piece and the moment the dean corrected it. He also sent a Dropbox folder with raw audio files and metadata showing the file path that included Bergman Urban Suite, because tech people leave footprints when they are lazy, which is always. He asked if I needed a witness to authenticate the stream. Courts like engineers, he said, half a joke. He also asked if I wanted a beer. I said yes to both. We met at a bar on Pstrosova that keeps its lighting like secrets, and I told him the whole story, and he told me about quitting a band because the lead singer kept rhyming hope with rope. He said he once wrote a song that another guy performed on TV as if it were his, and that he had kept his anger like a pet in a box and fed it old emails. He laughed and said, I admire the sticker move. I told him it was Petra's. He said, then I admire Petra, and I wrote it down in my head in case I ever had to hold the room together again. The months did what months do when you start holding receipts. They became a shape. On the 2nd May, OSA sent a confirmation letter that my work was recorded and that any broadcast royalties would be paid to me. On 8th of May, the Conservatory's Ethics Committee, which I didn't know existed, opened an inquiry into attribution practices within composition and contemporary practice. On 12th of May, Dr. Vasila informed me that Otto had been asked to take a leave for the rest of the term. He posted a photo of the Vltava at twilight on Instagram with a caption about stepping back to consider what matters, which got 198 likes and 3 comments saying, "Self-care king." He sent me a final email on 13th of May in which he did not apologize. He called me unyielding and said, "One day you will regret how this looks." The last sentence was a kind of prayer. Institutions forget. I stared at it until it became true and then false again. I forwarded it to Petra. She wrote, "He's good at this." And then, because she knows that sometimes you hold on by brutality, she added, "And you're better." I kept documenting. I updated my stalking report with his leaves turning largeness near my tram stop. After the police called him once, he stopped appearing. I kept copies of everything in a blue folder: registrations, emails, program proofs, the sticker template, Lorenzo's file path screenshots, a printed still of the MC's mistake and correction. I printed Petra's invoice and paid it the same day, 9,800 CZK, transferred from my Commercial Banker account, ending 14 to 610. I printed the receipt. I put it in the folder. Petty? Maybe. Perfect? Yes. The positive turn wasn't an award or a headline. It was a rehearsal at the end of May, with a community orchestra in Karlin that needed a new overture for their June concert and couldn't afford to commission. The conductor, a woman named Elżbieta with elbows made of majors, had heard the stream and invited me to bring the score. The players were a city in miniature: a dentist on clarinet, a librarian on cello, a bus driver on bass. The second violins asked questions that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with wanting to not embarrass a phrase. After rehearsal, an electrician named Marek, buying beers for half the front desks, asked me if I would come back in October and write them something with a brass chorale. I said yes, and he said, "We pay in cash and kolache," and it sounded like a sentence the law should recognize. You might want a twist with blood, but the twist I can offer is procedural and therefore clean. On 18th of June, the Ethics Committee issued a statement to faculty. Attribution must reflect authorship. Faculty may not present student or community works as part of a curatorial umbrella without explicit, written credit to authors. Failure to comply may result in disciplinary action. It wasn't poetry, but it was policy, and paper has a way of outliving applause. On 23rd of June, the Conservatory offered me a real job. Community Composition Coordinator, 0 6 FTE, 28,000 down CZK a month, 1-year contract, beginning 1st September 2024, with a clause I demanded, and they agreed to in 6 lines. All compositions created by the coordinator remain the property of the coordinator. The Conservatory shall credit the coordinator by full legal name on all programs, publications, and digital content related to such works. I took the pen in Dr. Vasila's office and signed it, and she signed it, and the building hummed around us like a properly tuned room. Lorenzo came to my apartment with lemons, and we listened to the oboist's A from the March stream, and I told him the oboe is how orchestras apologize to each other in advance. He laughed in the way men laugh when they have been alone with their anger and find out it has neighbors. We started going on walks that turned into dinners. He introduced me to his grandmother on FaceTime. She told me to add more salt to my sauce. We wrote a grant together, him for equipment, me for a neighborhood composition project, and the worst part was that we enjoyed the budget. The last scene belongs where it started. In September, the Conservatory ran the New Voices program again, this time intentionally including community fellows as composers and announcing their names as if names were more than sound. The hall was the same, the seats were the same, the oboist's A was the same recipe. The MC spoke the way you speak when you know people are listening for errors. He said, "We begin with a work by our community composition coordinator," then said my name in all the syllables it has, and the audience did that polite Prague clap that is 70% embarrassment and 30% sincerity, and I loved it with a ferocity that scared me. The offstage door opened, and a man in a dark suit slipped into the back row. He had his hair combed into a new idea of himself. He sat for 4 bars, stood, and left before anyone else repeated their role. I recognized the back of his neck, like you recognize a path you've moved on from. The oboist finished the A. The second violins breathed. The conductor looked at me and did the tiny nod that means, now is always. I think about that first night sometimes, how the first 3 notes landed, while the wrong name floated into the air like a colored gas. I think about the sticker, the dull little rectangle that was not art and saved me. I think about the words he used to make stealing sound like mentoring. Mostly I think about what it is to walk to the lip of a stage and say the sentence that breaks the spell. This work is mine. If you want a moral, it's boring and therefore helpful. Data before drama. If you want a tactic, it fits on a post-it. Register early, print receipts, insist on names. If you want revenge, I can only offer this. I am still here, and the oboist's A is not a prophecy but an agreement. And if you want an ending that circles to the beginning, the oboist's A faded and the hall hushed. I was halfway to my seat when the MC read the title I had printed myself under my name, and the first 3 notes landed, and I applauded a truth in C minor.